Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Dennison for Digital Trends, and behind me is Sony's flagship 4K TV, the X950G. Spoiler alert, it's pretty freaking fantastic. So if you follow TVs closely like I do, then you might be a little bit confused about the X950G's place within Sony's lineup. And that's because this year, Sony took their Z series or their Master Series LED TV and bumped that up to 8K resolution. So if you want the best 4K TV Sony makes this year, it's the X950G. Now the X950G comes in 4 sizes, 55, 65, 75, and 85. Normally this is the part where I tell you this review applies to all 4 sizes, but that's not the case this year. And the reason is, for the 75 and 85 inch big boys, Sony implemented their X wide angle technology, which basically improves off-axis viewing. That technology is not in the 55 and 65 inch models. So what we're gonna talk about today is how well this does or doesn't do off angle. And we have to presume that the 55 and 65 inch versions are not going to be all that great for off-angle viewing. More on that in just a second. So this video is predominantly about picture quality performance, and we'll get to that very shortly here. But I do want to skim over a couple of things. One is, this is an attractive television, and it should be because you're going to pay for it. Metal accents, thin bezels top and bottom. One complaint I do have is that the stand is extra wide, especially on the 75 inch model. If you're going to stand mount this as opposed to wall mounting it, make sure you have a generous sized console for it. We use the BDI corridor because it's built for a TV like this and for several other reasons. You'll want to make sure you have an ample piece of furniture. One thing I do have to mention here, on my unboxing video for this TV, I made a mistake. You guys called me on it, as well you should. The TV does support EARC. So if you're interested in that, the TV does it. It does not, however, support any of the other stuff that is often associated with HDMI 2.1, like variable refresh rate and auto low latency mode. That's not available, at least not now, and we have no reason to think that Sony's going to implement it. But if you were wanting some kind of future proofing in the form of EARC, yes, the TV supports it. It's printed right on the back. The remote has taken a turn for the better. It's not a radically different design, but it does have a much nicer premium feel that matches up with the television, and I appreciate that. Look, there's other aspects to this TV that I think you should know about, one of which is the fact that it's Android TV based, and it is way better than it was in the past thanks to Sony developing a chip that can handle the smart TV interface. But to go deep on any of those aspects, click our unboxing and basic setup link. It's right up here in the corner, and you can learn a lot more about what it's like to live with this TV. Okay, time for some TV nerd stuff. I've got a test pattern up here that I like to call a torture test. That's because it really works out the television's full array local dimming chops. On your left, you see the pattern in SDR, or standard dynamic range, and on the right, it's in HDR. And what you'll notice is that there is just a little bit of blooming in the SDR mode, but it stops very quickly, which tells us that it's got an appropriate amount of zones to do a good job of maintaining contrast and not getting too much halo. On the HDR side, what I notice is that it's about the same as SDR. The camera may not represent that, because we have to expose just to show it to you. But I noticed in a previous television review that there was this drastic difference between SDR and HDR mode. So I'm happy to see that Sony is exercising judicious processing to get you the best looking picture no matter what mode you're in. Here's another quick test pattern for you that I like to use because it ramps up from true black all the way up to peak white. In SDR, we're seeing exactly what we should see. Nice and smooth gradation all the way up to peak white. Now I'm going to switch to HDR. It takes a second for the TV to catch up, but watch right here. What you're going to notice is that we see a bar appear here. There's some delineation, and then there isn't. So what that tells me is that the TV is making some decisions about how it wants to clip the peak HDR highlights. And it looks at first that it displays that little bit of difference in gradation, but ultimately it juices up the entire last 4 bars to peak white. Here's another example where we basically ramp up from true black on the edge all the way to peak white in the center. This is SDR. We'll switch it over to HDR, and once the TV switches into HDR mode, we'll see the same thing. Now we got a lot more brightness happening in the center of the image, but it's spread out over a wider area, basically the same as the last test pattern that we just saw. Out-of-box color is also excellent, right up there with just about all the other flagship TVs. Sure, it'll benefit from professional calibration to get things just right. For instance, we noticed a little bit of a magenta hue to peak whites in some of the viewing that we did. That could be calibrated right out, but if we compare this to other TVs in the industry, Sony's is among the best. So I feel like this TV is performing far better than test patterns and measurements would suggest. We watch TV in this room with a fair amount of light. During testing, however, we get things very dark. And when things are very dark, you can see that the X wide angle filter is affecting the black levels a bit. They're a little bit on the grayish side in the darkest scenes. However, when we talk about the X wide angle filter, the option is to not have it. And I feel like the trade-off there is in favor of wide angle viewing. When I look at TVs like the Vizio P-Series Quantum X and their terrible off-axis viewing, I feel like it's more important to have several good places you can watch this TV than just one couch position. So I'm inclined to say that I prefer the X wide angle filter over slightly better black levels, because honestly, when I watch this TV casually, I'm pretty impressed. It does a really, really good job of presenting deep dark black levels everywhere that the local dimming is turned off. And the halo is minimized. I mean, this is far better than we got even 3 or 4 years ago. So I can still appreciate the improvement. The color is excellent. And I also feel like its treatment of HDR highlights is pretty spot on. I'm not noticing any degradation of detail in the bright specular highlights, and I'm definitely not seeing the hardcore crushing of blacks like we did on that test pattern. Okay, so for the less enthusiastic of you, I'll say this about the Sony X950G. It's an excellent TV. Out of the box, excellent presets, it looks fantastic, and you can throw just about anything at it. The X1 Ultimate processor that's built into this is going to take trashy 720p content that you get from cable and satellite and make it look as good as it's going to look on a large screen size, especially on a 75-inch TV like this. For those of you who are very scrutinous about your TV and you want the very best darkroom television out there, I don't think that this is necessarily the best darkroom TV out there. You can do a little bit better, certainly with an OLED, but even among other LCD TVs out there. I will say though that even though this isn't a Master Series TV from Sony, it behaves very, very close to one. It doesn't have as many zones of local dimming. Its peak brightness is not as intense as it could be, but everything else is there. I think it tone maps very well so that you get a big, beautiful picture. And at the end of the day, I think that's the most important consideration. If you really want the very best that Sony makes, maybe consider an OLED or step up to 8K. Don't think it's the right time for that. So to me, the X950G makes a lot of sense. It's a TV that Sony can produce without a massive amount of cost that's going to appeal to a wide base of consumers and even tickle that itch that video enthusiasts have. Plus, it's just got that Sony feel. Android TV's better than it's ever been before. I think it's a step up for Sony. So I'm going to give this TV my stamp of approval. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. You know what I'm gonna say next. I love your comments, so hit me up down below. I'll definitely be there to chat with you as I'm available. Always like and subscribe our videos if you aren't already, and hit that notification bell so you know when the next one's coming out. Here's a couple more videos we think you might like based on this one. And of course, visit digitaltrends.com for all the latest tech news and reviews.